Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on data governance and compliance. I hope everyone can hear me okay. We're delighted to have you all with us for the next hour or so. Thanks for your time. You're going to hear from experts on this very important and topical subject. So we hope you find today's session useful and informative. Some of you I may have met before, but many of you I have not. So just by way of introduction, my name is Darren Clark, and I'm the head of customer success here at OpenSky Data Systems in County Kildare. So who are we? Well, we would describe ourselves as an AI, automation, and data specialist. We're Irish owned and operated, founded over 20 years ago. We're based here in NIS in County Kildare. We also have offices in Poland. What do we do? Well, we design and manage what we would describe as intelligent software solutions for enterprise business organizations across Ireland and the UK and beyond. You'll see some of the people that we deal with here on the screen in front of you. So I guess just as the opening segment, what I want to do is provide you a little bit of context to the subject today before I introduce our lineup of speakers. So why data governance? Well, data governance is a critical part of risk and compliance management and risk and compliance frameworks for organizations, both in the private sector and in the public sector. And in Ireland, we are actually at the epicenter of the drive for good data governance. So to give you some context for that, between January 2023 and January 2024, in a 12-month period, there were almost 7,000 personal data breaches in Ireland. Now, that's just a number, 7,000. What does it mean? Well, it was 20% up on 2022. But to really understand the context of that, we're actually comparable with some much larger economies and countries. So, for example, our nearest neighbour, the UK, had 9,000 data breaches. In fact, it might surprise you to learn that we are ahead of a lot of much larger jurisdictions. So, for example, France had 4,200 to our 7,000. We're ahead of France, Spain, Italy. So Ireland really is at the epicenter. Now, that's not a surprise, of course, because Ireland is a global tech hub. As we all know, many of the giants of the tech industry are headquartered here. So we are at the epicenter, and consequently, there is a very robust level of enforcement in place too. In fact, not just are we at the epicenter, Ireland is actually top of the league in, for example, GDPR fines imposed. Almost 3 billion in GDPR breach fines by our regulator, by the Data Protection Commission, since 2018. Again, for context, that is 4 times the size of the second in the table, which is Luxembourg. Now, the numbers are a little bit skewed. It has to be admitted. For example, the Meta fine, which people will be aware of, was imposed by the Irish regulator last year. That's 1.2 million. But the numbers is still extremely large. And, you know, there's no room for complacency. Domestic companies are not immune. For example, Bank of Ireland, 2023, 750,000 euro fine. So that's just by way of introduction. I'm sure this audience appreciates the importance of good data governance. That's why you joined the webinar. And it doesn't get a lot of media coverage. I guess AI, is a sexier topic. It's more of a draw. That's one of the reasons we're running this webinar this afternoon. Because what people need to remember is that AI is not immune from poor data. The old saying that we've all heard, rubbish in, rubbish out, still very much applies in the case of AI. In fact, deploying AI tools in the absence of robust data governance creates very significant risks that most organizations would not be willing to live with once they understand the risks. So being AI ready is as much about being data ready as it is about nice, shiny new technology. So I guess my 2 opening messages to the webinar before we get into the discussion is: 1, poor data governance creates very significant risks for businesses. We're talking reputational risk, regulatory and compliance risk with fines and all that goes with that. Poor data governance undermines confidence of your stakeholders and your customers, and it's an operational risk because it becomes a barrier to progress offered by new technology such as AI, as I've just explained. But where there is risk, as most of us know in business, there is also opportunity. And the flip side, of course, is that strong data governance de-risks your organization. Strong data governance builds stakeholder confidence, and it becomes an enabler for your business to progress, to build operational efficiency and gain competitive advantage, which is what all businesses are, fundamentally after. Indeed, we're already working on data governance projects with a lot of our customers. I'm going to call out a handful: Dublin City Council, Health Research Board, Department of Children Equality and Integration. As you can imagine, these are organizations for whom data sensitivity, classification, and security is a paramount thing. So look, they are big challenges, but the good news is help is available. Today, we're bringing together an expert panel to address this topic. So just before I introduce our agenda and panel, some housekeeping things to note. Your microphones are muted as normal in a webinar, but we do want questions. We want to encourage you, please do put in questions. So while listening, put any questions you have in the chat. Go up to the top of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button. Click on the button, put the question in the chat, and put your name there too in case we don't get to all the questions. We're going to do Q&A at the end of the session, and we'll get through as many as time allows, but if you put your name, it means we can probably get back to you after the session. So probably enough from me. So without further ado, I want to introduce our panel. First speaker is going to talk to us about the regulatory and compliance environment. Arthur Cox, as you know, is one of the leading law firms in Ireland. We're joined by Ian Duffy, a partner from Arthur Cox. Ian will give us a 20-minute overview of the key things to know and that you need to be aware of about the regulatory and legislative framework. That'll be followed by our second speaker, who is William Flanagan. William is one of our owners and co-founders. He's a director of technology here at OpenSky. Now, William has been instrumental in bringing future-ready, transformational solutions to many enterprise organizations in Ireland and the UK. William is going to speak about Microsoft Fabric, which essentially is a data governance platform that can meet an awful lot of the needs that fall out of that legislative framework and meet a lot of those risks. We're then going to move on. We're joined by Paul Norris from Microsoft. Microsoft's data and AI function plays a key role in empowering Irish organizations. And Paul is going to talk to us about Microsoft Purview, again, a key tool that you should be aware of in terms of data governance. So without any further ado, that's our agenda. I'm going to invite our first speaker and hand over to yourself, Ian, to take the stage. Thanks.
Right. Thanks for that, Darren.
Thank you.
I'll just give it 1 second. There we go. There we have the slides. Right. I think, yeah, you're on mute. Fantastic. Okay, thanks again, Darren, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to speak to all of you. So as Darren said, my name is Ian Duffy. I'm a partner in Arthur Cox. And so what I'm going to do is talk a bit about the broader regulatory framework, both existing laws and upcoming laws that you need to be mindful of in this space. So I think, as most, if not all of you will be aware, the laws and regulations that are relevant to organizations when it comes to handling, managing, securing, using their data have grown very significantly in recent years. And to be candid, I think for many organizations, we're at a point in time now where it can be very challenging to stay on top of all these different rules and regulations in this space, never mind actually reviewing and enhancing your compliance frameworks and your programs to actually align with these laws. So like I said, for the next 15 or 20 minutes, what I'll try and do is talk through some of the key pieces of legislation in this space, touch on some of the key obligations under that legislation that are particularly relevant when we're thinking about how your organization manages, handles, secures its data. And obviously, that sort of high level outline of the laws won't act as a sort of silver bullet for the practical challenges that you face for actually addressing these laws and operationalizing them within your business. But hopefully it'll give you a picture of the overarching framework that you need to think about from a legal and compliance perspective, when it comes to data governance within your organization and thinking about key existing legal requirements and some of the expanding and new legal requirements that are arriving or that are coming down the tracks reasonably soon. Now, obviously, there are lots of different laws that I could talk about in this space. And, what I want to try and do is paint that sort of overarching picture of the key things you need to think about and make it reasonably digestible. So in order to do that, I'll focus in on 4 or 5 key pieces of legislation and touch on some of the relevant laws and relevant rules there. So the pieces of legislation I'm going to talk about are the AI Act, GDPR, DORA, the Data Act, and NIS2. So if we just flick on to the next slide, and we'll kick things off just by talking a bit about the AI Act. So the AI Act is the world's first ever comprehensive legal framework on AI. The majority of the key obligations under the AI Act will apply from August 2026. And it's designed to regulate EU organizations' use of AI systems. And when we say AI systems, what we're effectively talking about are machine-based systems that are able to ingest data, learn from that data, and either make decisions or contribute to decision-making in a reasonably autonomous fashion. And the AI Act classifies AI systems into multiple different categories. But for our purposes, the most important category is what's referred to as high-risk AI systems. And I say that this is the most important category for our purposes because high-risk AI systems are the type of systems under the AI Act that attract most of the obligations, and that includes from a data governance perspective. So in a nutshell, high-risk AI systems are those AI systems that are deemed to pose a risk to the safety and fundamental rights of people. And helpfully, Annexes 2 and Annexes 3 of the AI Act actually identify different types of AI systems that will be deemed high risk by default. And they include AI systems that could be used in a recruitment context, so for example, to filter CVs, and AI systems that can be used to make workplace decisions. So that could be, for example, decisions around promotions or redundancies. So these types of AI systems will obviously be relevant to all of your organizations. And it may well be the case that your organization is already making use of these types of AI systems. Other types of AI systems that will by default be considered high risk under the AI Act include AI systems used to determine creditworthiness or to establish a credit score, or AI systems that are used for risk assessment and pricing purposes in the context of life and health insurance products and services. So those types of AI systems will obviously be particularly relevant to organizations in the banking and insurance sector. And if you are using high-risk AI systems, you'll need to consider your obligations under the AI Act and take steps to comply with those obligations. And to a large degree, the extent of your obligations under the AI Act will turn on whether you are what's referred to as a provider of an AI system. That's effectively, in most cases, the developer of the AI system, or if you're a deployer of an AI system. And in most cases, that will be the party using the AI system. So perhaps unsurprisingly, the provider of the AI system is the party that actually develops it. Is the one that's subject to more onerous obligations under the AI Act, as opposed to the deployer being the user, who is still subject to reasonably substantive obligations under the AI Act, but not to the same extent as the deployer. And what I'll do is I'll just quickly run through some of the key obligations under the AI Act that you need to think about if you're acting as a deployer or a provider from a data governance perspective. So if you're a deployer of an AI system, you'll have a broad range of obligations under the AI Act, and they will include things like identifying and mitigating risks that your AI system can pose, applying robust data governance and management processes around data collection, origin of data, data preparation, data quality. Providers of high-risk AI system will also need to ensure that that system is designed to generate and maintain event logs. You'll also have to ensure that your AI system achieves an appropriate level of accuracy, robustness, and cybersecurity. So that's just a few of the many obligations that will apply to providers under the AI Act. And you'll see that clearly these type of obligations do place a premium on effective data governance. And without that, in practice, it will be very difficult for a provider of a high-risk AI system to comply with multiple of their obligations under the AI Act. From the perspective of the deployer of an AI system, there are also a number of obligations under the AI Act which place a premium on effective data governance. And they include requirements around maintaining logs automatically generated by the AI system and monitoring the operation of that high-risk AI system in line with the instructions received from the provider of the AI system. So if we just jump on to the next slide, we'll talk about our old friend, the GDPR. So I'm sure most of not, if not all of you, will be very familiar with the GDPR and the obligations and burdens it imposes on organizations. And at a macro level, I'm sure we can all appreciate that good data governance is obviously an integral part of complying with many of the obligations under the GDPR. But what I thought I might do is just drill down into that in a bit more detail, and it might be useful to do that and highlight a number of areas under the GDPR where data governance is particularly important. And the first one that I'll mention is perhaps unsurprisingly the obligations under the GDPR around records of processing activities, which are more commonly referred to as ROPAs. So Article 30 of the GDPR requires organizations with over 250 staff to maintain records setting out certain details around their processing of personal data. So for example, the purposes for which they process personal data, types of personal data that they process, who they disclose that personal data to, how long they retain it, and among other data points as well. Now, obviously, many organizations will inherently have a good sense of how and why they process personal data and who they disclose it to, but having effective structures in place around how you manage and manipulate your data effectively and how you can look across your data set within your organization, obviously subject to appropriate access controls, will be very useful when it comes to actually generating and maintaining your ROPAs in line with the requirements of the GDPR. The GDPR also imposes obligations on organizations to keep data accurate and up to date, and to limit its use of personal data to what's necessary for the relevant processing purposes. Now, obviously, that's easier said than done, particularly when you're dealing with large data sets. But again, good data governance can help with managing this challenge. Another really important requirement of the GDPR, and going back to points that Darren touched on at the outset, is around data security. And in the words of Article 32 of the GDPR, implementing and maintaining appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure a level of security appropriate to the risks affecting the relevant data. And of course, in practice, it's going to be a challenge to keep your data secure if you don't have a good handle on what data you actually hold and where it sits, because I guess in very simple terms, it's going to be difficult to protect something if you don't really know what that something is and you don't know where exactly it's located. So taking steps to ensure that you have a good handle on the data that you hold can really help your organization with making sure that it puts appropriate controls and restrictions in place around access and use of personal data within your organization, which align with the security requirements of the GDPR. So if we move on to the next slide, we'll talk about DORA, or the Digital Operational Resilience Act. So DORA is an EU-wide regulation that will apply from the 17th of January 2025. And it introduces uniform requirements across the EU for the security of network and information systems of companies and organizations operating in the financial sector. So in effect, DORA will apply to banks, insurers, investment firms, e-money institutions, pension schemes, other types of financial entities as well. And the reality is many of DORA's obligations and key requirements won't be directly relevant to the underlying theme of today's session, which is data governance, but a number of them will be quite relevant, and it's worth just touching on them quickly. So firstly, DORA requires in-scope entities to identify and map their ICT-supported business functions, their ICT assets, their information assets, associated roles and responsibilities within their organization. DORA also requires in-scope entities to identify ICT risks facing their business and to assess cyber threats and ICT vulnerabilities that are relevant to their organization. And obviously, your business can only do this and will only be able to do it if it has an effective ability to collect and collate relevant data in the first instance, and then to effectively structure, manipulate, and maintain that relevant data on an ongoing basis. DORA also requires in-scope entities to manage, classify, and report ICT incidents affecting their operation. And there's also a separate obligation under DORA to maintain registers of information relating to your ICT service providers. So again, this will all require effective data management structures so that the relevant information can be gathered, it can be manipulated, interpreted, extracted, maintained, etc., on an ongoing basis. And similar data management and handling capabilities will also be important to comply with requirements under DORA on in-scope entities to share information on cyber threats, because again, ultimately, your organization won't be able to do this. You're not going to be able to share information on cyber threats that you see or potential vulnerabilities that are relevant to your organization and potentially other financial entities if you don't have the tools in place to effectively collect, collate, and analyze relevant data and trends around cyber incidents and threats affecting your organization. So again, really key to comply with those types of requirements under DORA. If we move on, we might talk about the Data Act. So the Data Act is an EU regulation that generally will apply from the 12th of September 2025. And it's focused on trying to incentivize and standardize the widespread sharing of data across the EU. It aims to do this by introducing EU-wide rules on making available data to users of connected products and related services, and introducing rules on switching between different data processing services. So if your organization is a provider of a connected product or a related service, such as, for example, an app that can be used to adjust appliances would be a good example, or if your organization is a provider of a data processing service, such as a cloud service or another type of SaaS service, the Data Act will likely be relevant to you. And in terms of key requirements under the Data Act, for organizations providing connected products and related services, these organizations will be required to ensure that data generated by their products and services is directly accessible to the users, or if this isn't feasible, that data must be made available to the user upon request and without undue delay. Secondly, if your organization is a provider of data processing services, such as a SaaS service or a cloud service, a key requirement applicable to your organization under the Data Act will be to enable your customers to switch seamlessly between service providers. So as part of this, you'll have to facilitate your customers moving across the data that is directly or indirectly generated or co-generated by that customer's use of the service to a new service provider. So when you think about the nature of those obligations under the Data Act, accessibility of data, data sharing, data switching, I think it really goes without saying that in practice, it won't be possible for entities that are in scope of the Data Act to comply with these various data sharing, data access, data switching requirements, unless they have processes and tools in place that enable them to effectively structure, to collate, to manipulate, manage, extract their data, unless they effectively have really good data governance structures in place, because I think ultimately that will be at the heart of operationalizing your regulatory compliance with the Data Act. Fifth and final, if we just jump on to the next slide. Right, fifth and final piece of legislation that I'm going to talk about is NIS2. So NIS2 is an EU-wide cybersecurity directive that applies from the 17th of October 2024, so very soon, less than a month until NIS2 comes into effect. And it applies to a wide range of organizations across multiple different sectors, so the likes of the energy sector, transport, health, digital infrastructure, manufacturing, food, amongst quite a number of others. And I don't propose to get into the weeds of NIS2 now in great detail. I'm conscious I've thrown quite a lot of information at all of you about various different regimes, and I am conscious of allowing the other speakers to talk to you a bit more about how you operationalize aspects of data governance and how you operationalize compliance with these various different regulatory regimes that I'm touching on. But what I would say is that NIS2 does impose pretty extensive obligations on organizations in relation to identification, classification, reporting of ICT incidents, maintaining logs in relation to ICT incidents that are very similar in ways to the type of obligations that we already discussed in the context of DORA. So again, similarly to what we discussed in relation to DORA, effective structures that enable your organization to capture and manipulate and maintain incident-related data and logs will be an important part of the puzzle in terms of working towards compliance with NIS2. So that's 5 different pieces of legislation and some key pieces of obligation in relation to them from a data governance perspective. And I do appreciate there's quite a lot there. And obviously there's other aspects of all of those different pieces of legislation that I could get into and that are relevant from a data governance perspective. And there are additional nuances to multiple of the obligations that I discussed. But I think, like I mentioned at the outset, hopefully that gives you, a sort of overarching sense of some of the key things that you need to think about when looking at existing and impending and future regulatory obligations and what they mean for how your organization handles and uses data and how it approaches data governance. And look, the reality is that I'm sure most, if not all of your organizations will have very well developed data governance processes and controls in place. And if I was to leave you one message, it would be that, generally getting that sort of macro or principles-based understanding of some of the key requirements that I've touched on in existing and upcoming regulatory regimes that are relevant from a data governance perspective will be really important for your organization when it comes to trying to look at, well, what is it that we already do and how does that tie in with all of these new laws and regulations that are either have just arrived or that are coming into effect reasonably soon, and trying to identify synergies and figure out where we can utilize a lot of the processing controls that we already have in place, and if we can't or if they don't quite fit the bill, thinking about how we can supplement them, how we can adjust them to make sure that we do have processes and controls in place and structures from a data governance perspective that are designed to align with some of these requirements that are coming down the tracks that I've just talked through. So that's it from me for now. I'm of course very happy to take questions at the end of the session, but for now I'll hand you back to Darren.
Ian, thanks so much. That was great. Terrific overview, and you got through 5 pieces of legislation in 15 minutes. So very impressive. Look, we are getting questions in, so we will come back to those at the end of the session. So thank you very much for an excellent overview. I mean, really what stood out to me across, all those pieces of legislation is that, and I think you said this a number of times, without data governance, it would be very difficult or more or less impossible to achieve compliance with the regulatory regime that's there. I mean, the depth and breadth of it is quite comprehensive. So, that's probably for me a key takeaway. And you talked about having the right processes and tools in place. So I think that probably leads us on to the next speaker. Now, I should have said at the start, William, this is the first of 2 segments for William. William is going to talk us through the sort of Microsoft Fabric, key tool in your drive towards data governance. William will also join again later on in the presentation to share with us a case study, bringing all of these pieces together. But for now, William, I'm going to hand over to you to take us through Microsoft Fabric.
Great. Thanks, Darren. Thanks very much for that. And hopefully you're seeing my screen there. And thanks to Ian as well for that excellent overview of the various legislative landscape issues that we need to be aware of. What I'd like to talk about following on from that is how Microsoft Fabric represents that keystone of modern data governance. Just to introduce myself, I'm William Flanagan. I'm a director and co-founder of OpenSky, director of technology here. And I have about 30 years experience working in Irish, UK and European markets, and data has been fundamental to everything we've been doing here at OpenSky throughout the life cycle of the organization. So just to recap on some of the things that Ian was talking about, the regulatory environment and those significant challenges, and it can indeed feel initially a little bit head spinning at first with NIS2 and the Artificial Intelligence Act, and obviously GDPR has been there and isn't going anywhere. And so where do we find the opportunity in the midst of all of these things? Well, it is there for sure, and I'd like to maybe talk about that in a second, but just to maybe compound the issue first of all, if we look a little bit at the technological landscape that a lot of us are working in our organizations, fragmentation is very common. It's very common, that we'll have multiple different technology stacks, applications doing various different things across different divisions within our organizations. We could have different locations, different profit centers, and we can have siloed information across our organization where unit divisions that need to talk to each other, need to share information, have a really hard time doing it. And that can lead to, for example, lots and lots of integration projects, which are complex, costly, and we will end up doing them again and again and again, because now we need to integrate SAP with Oracle, and we need to integrate Oracle with Salesforce, and then Salesforce with Dynamics, and it goes on and on. And the ability to get to a point where we're getting insight from our data ecosystem, it just time-wise goes on and on. This is a real issue in terms of scalability. So as well as the data governance issue that presents, how are we going to gain these insights so that we can have a cost-efficient operation and that we can gain advantage on our competition and so on through the use of the data assets that we have, which undoubtedly have inherent and latent value within them. So doing these things in this way is really what lead to limited scalability and doesn't give us the flexibility we need. All of that leads to higher operational costs. And again, those costs would go up in light of the elements of governance and changes that regulations that Ian was talking about. So where do we find the opportunity then within all of this this risk? Well, this is where we want to talk about Fabric. And fundamentally, we want to talk about the concept of a unified data platform. In terms of governance and in terms of the broader opportunity here, this is really fundamental to what we want to talk about today. So first of all, what is Microsoft Fabric? So Microsoft Fabric is an intelligent data foundation built, well, first of all, it's a unified data platform that gives you the capability to have data governance across the enterprise, to gain insights and to do so in a secure way, in a compliant way, and to be able to deal with all your compliance and regulatory functions. Let's just talk a little bit about what it's made of. So if we look, first of all, this intelligent data foundation, there's a range of tools within the platform. If we look at Data Factory first, which enables us to gather information from all those fragmented systems that I spoke about. There's connectors for all of those, and we can bring that information together and then use a tool called data engineering to add shape to that information, to do cleansing and so on, so that we can store that centrally in something like a data warehouse, which becomes a centralized structure for data across the organization. We can then, depending on requirements, we can have machine learning models being run through data science. If you're an organization that collects data at high speed, you can have, for example, IoT sensors, or you're collecting a lot of telemetry and so on. Real-time intelligence will enable you to turn that into real-time intelligence, exactly what it says on the tin. Power BI gives you the ability to visualize data through interactive reports. I'm sure lots of you will be familiar with that already. And Data Activator, another self-service tool for end users who can use that to detect patterns within their data and trigger workflows based on those, or notifications, etc. Within the entirety of the platform, Copilot and Microsoft Copilot and the AI engine therein is writ large across the platform, and that's really where one of the productivity boosts come from when you're trying to build out these platforms. On top of that, there's technology called OneLake, which is your single foundation. So you can bring all of your data and your information into a high performance, cost-effective location for storing that information. And underpinning it all is this unified concept. We have a unified experience. For example, you'll all be familiar with Microsoft 365, but it's a very similar concept here, where we have a SaaS product with security and governance, our compute, storage, and our business model all handled within the same platform. So we don't have to worry anymore about that fragmentation. If I just consider, first of all, the capabilities that we get within a unified platform, a unified data platform, we get, first of all, the ability to do analytics across the organization in one place, in a simplified, SaaSified area, which is fully secured in governance. And I'm going to loop back to governance at the end of this presentation in a minute. Lake-centric, the fact that we have one lake, which is like, think of it as your OneDrive for everything to do with data in your organization. It's your single version of the truth. And at every tier within that, regardless of where the information is coming in or where it's being cleansed, it's available within that governed structure. And there's various ways of describing this: democratization or federated analytics, the capability of giving the information and the data to the people who understand it best, which is the business. They will be the people who drive the insight, and the insights to the actions within the organization. And it's much better that we do it that way rather than having them relying on somebody else to do that for them. And then AI powered, and the concept I mentioned that Copilot is built into the entirety of the platform, giving you that accelerated productivity. But also we'll have the capability of generating customized AI models to automate laborious tasks, such as very document-heavy tasks that you might have in various different sectors, whether that's risk assessment, all the various different things Ian was talking about. But this loops us back to data governance. data governance is the critical aspect of this. So all of the functionalities that we talked about there, which gives us such an ability to have our unified view of the world across our ecosystem and to make quick and powerful decisions, we must have compliance and we must have data governance. And the fact that we have a unified data platform is critical to that, where we can apply our data quality and our integrity of our data in one place. And within that one place, we can then have we can have roles and assessment, access management and security role levels applied clearly and granularly across the board. And then from there, whether it's the policies around NIS2 or GDPR, that they can all be applied consistency across the board within that. So within Microsoft Fabric, which you'll be using for manipulating data, driving your analytics and insights and so on, has best of breed capabilities in terms of data governance built into the platform. And just as maybe a segue into what will be upcoming in the next presentation, the other thing about Microsoft Fabric is that it's tightly integrated with Microsoft's other suite of products in the data governance area, which is Microsoft Purview, which is even broader again in terms of its scope for data governance. But I will stop talking there, Darren, because that's the end of this segment, and I'll come back in a while to talk about case study and other elements.
That's great. Thanks, William, for that. That was, again, a great presentation, a great overview. I mean, what really stands out to me is the word unified. Obviously, is everywhere here. This is all about unifying data governance, bringing all the pieces together. You know, and I think Fabric is a really impressive tool and very comprehensive tool. I'm going to go over now to Paul Norris. Welcome, Paul. So Paul is from Microsoft and is a specialist in this field in AI solutions, and is going to talk to us about Purview, which is one of the elements that William has referred to there. Paul, over to you.
Thanks a million, Darren, and hello everyone. Good to meet you. As my colleague said, Paul Norris, Data and AI Solution Specialist here in Microsoft Ireland. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just introducing you to a suite of tools and products that come under our umbrella of Microsoft Purview. Purview is our product suite that basically covers the area of data governance, document governance, policy enforcement, really when it comes to the data that may live within your IT estate. It can cover the document unstructured world, so it fits into the Word, Excel kind of productivity suite of tools and how you manage the documents you might create there. But it also really then falls into the data side where you have data sources, data sets, and that may be being loaded into Fabric or then used down the line for Power BI dashboards. When it comes to data governance from our perspective, we're really looking at it as taking what was mentioned there at the beginning with all the acts and the regulation and compliance that you need to try and align to, and finding a way to actually implement practical solutions to ensure that you can demonstrate compliance with those in the form of the technology that we offer. So it's this concept of trying to bring together the best kind of practices and finding ways then to actually just show that you have it enforced in your organization via the technology that you choose to implement. How we go about kind of providing you a way to do that is we generally take an opinion of data governance is best split across the organization as a shared responsibility. So we take a bit of a federated approach where it's kind of a conjunction between both the IT, analytics, and business organizations to ensure that we have the right subject matter experts at the right point in the process to actually put the governance policies in place. We also like to ground everything in the concepts that the business are using, because ultimately the data needs to have some sort of relation to why it's being captured, what process is it being used for, why would I want to retain it for ongoing operational purposes. They're all things that you need usually to actually start showing compliance with the different regulations. And in order to try and make this efficient, because data estates can be large and complex, we have some generative AI assistants within our tools as well, and they can help you with things like automatic classification, tracking of data, detection of data issues, etc., as you enforce policies around this. We do like to look at governance as kind of a two-sided coin as well. Yes, it does help you with some of the stuff around compliance, demonstrating that, ensuring that you align to regulation requirements, and they're extremely important, and they might be the first reason why you choose to go down this journey. But after that, once you have a program and the right technology in place, it actually starts to unlock a lot of value for the organization that maybe you wouldn't have gotten without a mature data governance program and the technology to implement it. So things that become easier are maybe discovery of data assets within your organization, curation of those and making those available to different groups, and also then obviously enabling individuals to sort of self-service data sets so they can start to generate new value and add those new assets back into the overall platform, and they become incrementally beneficial to others. So we like to think that, yes, okay, the governance piece might be kind of the stick, if you like, that's kind of forcing you to do it. But once you actually get into it, there are a whole lot of other organizational benefits it unlocks. So just to touch on that kind of federated approach that our kind of technology enables, it's one of a couple of different ways you can approach this, and you can imagine maybe what some of the others would. But really, in a federated approach, what you're looking at is you maybe have a technology organization within your own company, and maybe they're the one who initially deploys and configures these kind of governance tools for you. But in doing so, they will then have ownership of maybe a part of the overall governance process, along then with the actual business departments and the SMEs that then might be the ones that are closer to why that data is being captured and for what use it's being used. They would sort of then take on roles maybe like data stewards, etc. And in our platforms, everyone has a place in there where they can collaborate, put in value back into it with regards to descriptions or tagging or providing kind of context on what the data is and why it exists. What we're trying to get everyone to is this concept of, if you can get everything set up kind of working smoothly, you start to get into a kind of a virtuous feedback cycle where when you identify uses for data or new data you want to bring into the organization, you have a relatively smooth system and process whereby that's kind of onboarded and mastered in the governance platform. Once it's in there, then the data can become visible and available to things like Microsoft Fabric that William mentioned. And in there, individuals will start to develop new use cases for it. They'll generate insights, new assets, and that then kind of gets fed back in as its own unique kind of valuable piece of data. And then that becomes available to others. So like I said, we're trying to facilitate this cycle where you can have a structure around what you're doing, but ultimately you're just kind of trying to drive more value out of the data assets you have and do it all in a kind of governed way. When we just touch again then on that kind of concept of like really trying to link it in with the business, because this is important in the context of data as a standalone kind of island doesn't really have much meaning on its own. It's hard to define what the retention policy should be if you don't understand why the data set was captured and what is in it. So within all our products, we like to try and align with these concepts of having a glossary that can be customized to your organization, where you can define terms that are in your data sets that are important to you. So that allows you to find them across anywhere in your estate where they might exist. You can start to put objectives around certain terms, maybe like the quality of a particular field in a database and whether or not it should stay above a certain level and trigger alerts if there were any issues with it. And then when it comes to really sensitive fields, and those might be the ones where you're starting to get into things like GDPR areas, for example, like personally identifiable information, you can start to develop concepts of like what we call critical data items. And these ones then can be specially monitored as the scans that the platform runs happen. And they can alert you if maybe PII data has accidentally slipped into a piece of your maybe analytics pipeline where it shouldn't be, or some bit of data wasn't redacted, say, for example, while moving up the pipe to a report. So that just allows you to like be very confident that if someone's asking you what data sources are you integrating, where are they being stored, for what purposes are they being used, you have one place you can go to kind of look into this. And I think, as was hinted on already with the other speakers, obviously you're well aware of the kind of new generative AI use cases that are sort of being developed now over the last couple of years. And one thing that's very clear in this new world of generative AI is the AI, it does not know everything out of the box, right? It has its own level of understanding and capability, but it doesn't know your own internal organization and your own data. So at some point you end up having to connect it to the data sets to give it that context of what it is you're doing in your organization so it can be more intelligent and answer questions. And in order to do that, you really would like to have a level of understanding of what the data you have is first. Is it appropriate to connect the Gen AI to it? Is there a level of kind of redaction, that may need to be done before you do that? And having a governance layer in place just allows you to go in confidently, see exactly what you have, and make those decisions about what you might want to connect to or not potentially. So when we're saying then trying to get those right foundations in place and being able to innovate and kind of drive on the new AI use cases, Our approach to it, as I kind of mentioned, is a federated one, but we do like to try and emphasize that kind of dual purpose. You need the right level of defense, and that can mean you need ability to look at data security. You need to ensure compliance with all the acts that are mentioned. You need to manage risks. That could be data leakage, or it could be, data kind of not being in the right areas of your organization. But also with that, we like to emphasize that all of this kind of should, in theory, also drive out a lot of benefits for the organization. So activation of new use cases for your data, driving new innovation, getting new value from it, having a central place to look at your data products and your catalogs, and ultimately enabling you to go on the next part of the journey that might be the AI aspects. So just kind of rounding up here on the concept of the Purview platform. Under the hood, Purview breaks itself up broadly into a couple of big areas: the data security, the governance, and the risk and compliance posture. We have kind of add-ons in the Microsoft 365 document side of the world that enable these features within that estate. And then for the likes of the Fabric world that William has mentioned, I'm just going to drill in a little bit on that data governance central one, which tends to be more on the data set side. And that's the one that complements the kind of Fabric space when you're looking at more structured and database and role-based data sets. So when you have the data governance view of Purview in your mind, what you're looking at doing is you're generally looking at building up a map of your data state. And then within the product, we have a feature that allows you to identify all the sources of data that you might be using for analytics or AI workloads. So they could be on-premise, they could be in other clouds, they could be API endpoints, they could be storage containers, document folders. You get to build up a map of your entire data estate. And you can define scans that run on those on a regular basis. And as part of that, you can have those critical data items we mentioned identified, and you keep those up to date over time. And you can set special alerts and processes that would be triggered should anything change in those that maybe you want to be aware of. When you then say build a pipeline in Fabric that brings the data sets from those sources into Fabric, Purview automatically picks that up because it's deeply connected with Fabric, and it can understand now that that's the source of your data and what's in it. It understands that you've developed a pipeline to bring the data into your analytics platform, and then it can see within the analytics platform where the data is stored, maybe what you're building on it, what data sets you're creating, and then what maybe Power BI reports are then being built on it. So you get a very detailed lineage of where your data started and maybe where it ends up. To give you an idea of maybe the kind of screens and sections within something like Purview data governance that you would get when you're looking at the kind of the data structured side of the world. You would get a data discovery kind of view of the world. So that's one place you can go in and actually just do a search for, I would like to find every place in my organization I'm retaining data about addresses, or where email addresses might be stored, or where there might be sensitive information on different topics. You can go in there, and across everything, you can just get a quick search and see where they are, and then also see what they might be used for. You can do kind of a level of data curation. So that's where you can start to maybe say, these data items relate to my HR department or my sales department or an ops department, and kind of find a way to kind of view all your data regardless of where it lives, more on a departmental basis. And that can help you to align with the business, and kind of their stewards can help on the kind of generating the knowledge of their data estate. And then obviously on the management side, you can do a lot of kind of data access control and quality checks as well on this, because what you can do in Purview is, if you have a catalog of all the data assets, there's actually a way in there someone can request access to a data set, and that triggers a workflow where the right people get involved and they review it and they can decide whether to apply it or not. And then finally, one of the big areas we see people using is the data estate health quality. So obviously, if you have people in the organization generating insights, or you have AIs that are relying on this data to be accurate, you can generate health check reports that might be scanning the sources or scanning parts of your analytics platform, and you set rules on maybe when certain things are thresholds are hit, or where certain values maybe are not fully populated that would impact the downstream insights. You can trigger alerts and then put in place some mitigations on those. And then finally, just to emphasize that deep integration with Fabric. So as William mentioned, Fabric has, I think, over 40 or 50 different compliance security features out of the box. So it is a very robust platform from a compliance perspective all on its own. But I mentioned there that Fabric is only maybe sometimes a piece of your analytics estate. You could have databases outside Fabric that are your sources. You could have folders. You could have other systems using data out of Fabric on the other side as well. And you need to have an end-to-end view of everything so that you'll fully understand where the data starts and then where it's being used. And that's where the Azure Microsoft Purview data governance product connects in with that. And then together they they give you that full end-to-end view of the estate. So I think with that, I'd like to try and hand back to Darren, if that's okay. And if there's any questions, we have the Q&A open. So thank you everyone for your time.
Paul, thanks very much indeed. That was a really good overview of Purview, and really good illustration of some of the key features. I love your idea of a virtuous circle of data value, because I think we did emphasize at the beginning that while there are risks, there's opportunity, and I guess that's the point you're touching on there, which brings us nicely to it, I guess. So thanks again, Paul. We do have questions coming in, but I just want to remind people to put your questions in there. Click on that Q&A button at the top of your screen, and don't miss out on the opportunity to ask a question. We'll have Q&A at the end. But for now, I'm going to go back to William, who is going to sort of present speaking of the word unified. He's going to bring it all together and talk about the benefits of all of these tools when they're combined, and use a case study to do that. William, over to you.
Thanks very much, Darren. Yeah, I'd like to do exactly that. So just to take us through an organization that's overcoming these challenges that we've been talking about since the beginning of this webinar, right through all the speakers, using the technologies that we've just talked about here, which is Microsoft Fabric and Purview. So the customer we'll be talking about here is from the healthcare provider space. And some of the issues that they're dealing with is, well, first of all, the growth of their own organization that they've been going through. So there's been a lot of consolidation and expansion, purchase of absorbing of extra new sites, and new services being provided, retrenchment of resourcing, and lots of different cost outlays that are required as a result of that growth. And on top of all of those things, there's quite a fragmented data estate and ICT estate with multiple sites and no current overarching, or sorry, to begin with, no overarching enterprise architecture. Now that's obviously a work in progress where that enterprise architecture is being put in place, but things like enterprise architecture projects for complex organizations like this who've gone through acquisitions and different things are notoriously complex and can take a number of years to execute fully. So within this organization, we had a range of different teams struggling to work together, because teams who work together, like HR teams who are working in different sites, need to share information with each other, need to have access to the same information. It needs to be the single version of the truth. And they need to have confidence in that, so that if they're going to trigger workflows based on data, that's going to be accurate. And again, this was a struggle from where this organization was coming from. On top of that, decisions need to be made then at group level as to on investments, on both physical investment but also ICT investment, and HR investment, and so on. And for decisions to be made, we need to build those things on solid data. We need data-driven decision making and decision support, not just locally at individual sites or functions, but all the way up to the top of the organization. Again, confounding all of these things, like we talked about, there's the inherent data governance risks that go with that. The compliance nature of what Ian began the session talking about is a very difficult thing to achieve in an environment like this, because if we look at, say, this particular customer and the nature, I've just given a very sanitized version here of the nature of the legacy and fragmentation that they were coming from, but like each of the different sites in this provider would have different technologies for, we'll say, CRM. So there might be, say, CRM on premise here with Dynamics, could be Salesforce here, could be no formal CRM in another site, there could be finance in infrastructure as a service in one place, a different version of the same product over here, and a totally different product here. Now, as I mentioned, there is an enterprise architecture plan to consolidate a huge number of these transactional systems, and some work has been done on that already, for example, on the budgeting side. But those things take a long time to implement, and in particular, if we're talking about an organization that needs a unified data platform and needs it now, then we can't wait that amount of time. We need to do something else. And so with that in mind, we work with them to build out this 2B platform. So this is the journey that we've been taking the organization on. So if we look on the left-hand side here, we can see the various different sites that I've been talking about, and there are various different forms of technology that they've been using. And what we've done is built out this unified data platform. So within this, we see Microsoft Fabric, and we see Microsoft Purview down here delivering the governance and security, and underpinned by OneLake. So what we have is the information coming from all the different functions, such as this site's HR, the finance, and so on, being fed into via Data Factory into these ingestion pipelines. And from there, we move the information into these lake houses here. This is what's called a medallion architecture. So we have kind of a bronze, silver, and gold concept here, where we're bringing the information in its rawest form into our bronze structure here. But now it's here, and now it's safe, and we can bring it in here as often as we want, because we know that this is high performance and cost-effective storage. And then on the in the silver area, we then have is information that's been, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to jump ahead there. Excuse me. Go back one. We have our information that's now being cleansed, and we've joined all our information and cleansed it. And now we're ready to bring it forward to our gold area, where we're going to have our semantic models that we can now use to underpin things like Power BI reporting for end users, regardless of whether it's federated down to a particular site or a function within that site, such as HR or finance, or whether this is all the way up to group level or every step in between, that we have federated the capability to generate the analytics, but also the accountability that goes along with that, as Paul was talking about in the previous concept. Because through the use of Purview, we're collecting metadata at every point in the chain, whether it's at the point of collection here, or it's the point of moving things through pipelines from here to here to here, over here to Power BI, or for example, we're creating shortcuts here that will be consumed by Dynamics platforms or Power Apps, that we know where everything is. So if we're looking at a report here that combines HR data, finance data, budgeting data, and so on, we will know exactly who can see that and which elements of the data that they can see, and we'll have full traceability on all of that. So just to talk about where that leaves us with the customer and after our initial rollout with them. So this is phase one, and we deployed this solution using an agile methodology. So this is a really important thing that I'll come back to in a minute, but what that does enable us to do is to get to our risk mitigation areas very quickly and start delivering value. So for example, with risk mitigation, the data governance risks were reduced by enforcing compliance standards through Microsoft Fabric and Microsoft Purview. That's an out-of-the-box win, because it's not just the regulatory compliance things that we're trying to deal with. We also have our own internal regulations that, like, for example, we'll want to prevent individuals from a certain site seeing information from another site. Like if somebody's in charge of finance for one particular profit center, they shouldn't be drilling down into another profit center's area. Secondly, the enhanced decision making. So because we've centralized the information together into the unified data platform, and then we've federated the capability to create value from that solution, decisions can be made faster and with better insights. Furthermore, just the improved collaboration. One of the issues that we had in this organization from the outset was the inability from people, say, doing the HR function across these different sites, and then answering, say, to regional and to group level management teams. We've solved that now, because we can, in a curated way, manage that information so that those users can gain the insights from those data sets. Scalability. So we're talking here about our phase one rollout, but the platform and the underlying infrastructure that's needed for us to scale forward as the organization grows and as it acquires new sites and offers new things to its customers. The platform will grow with that, and we'll be plugging in and reusing the same design patterns and the same governance capabilities that we had from the beginning. And that will enable us to scale seamlessly across new business domains, as well as monitoring everything that we're doing heretofore. And then just AI, this is something that I wanted to talk about actually. So at the beginning, at the outset of these projects, talking to the customer, they were on one hand excited about the possibilities of AI and the automations and things that could drive, but on the other hand, extremely risk averse due to things like the knowledge around the AI Act and the inherent risks of, poor use of AI engines and so on. So one of the great things about this is by having that governance and capability built right through Fabric and having it there in Purview, this gives us the capability to go through into our next phase of automation with them using tools like Azure OpenAI, where we can build large language models. So for example, if we're doing things like Ian gave a use case at the beginning of automating elements of recruitment, where we're looking at documentation and automating recommendations from that we'll know at every element of the process what's being done by AI, what information it's being trained on, and where the human in the loop is, and what recommendations they were receiving as part of that. So just finally, one of the things that I would say here, because and while this was a phase one project, it was relatively large, and these things can seem intimidating, right? So I want to come back to the concept of an agile methodology. How can we deliver value as quickly as possible in an environment like this, given everything we've been talking about on this webinar? And I would say being able to get to the value point as soon as possible is critical here, to be able to take off a piece of functionality and deliver that and prove that what you've just done can scale. So going back to maybe something I said at the beginning of my first talk around trying to deal with fragmentation and siloed data sets, we don't want that. We want to eliminate that. So if we do something in an agile fashion and prove that that's going to sort those problems out, we can then scale from that nucleus and move onwards. To that end, there's quite a good initiative in place for Microsoft. And Microsoft have made a funding stream available via their partners to actually enable potential customers to understand the proof of value of the very technologies that we've been talking about here. So for example, if you were identified a high priority use case within your organization, we can implement technologies like Fabric and Purview to actually enable you to see the value that's deliverable and the scalability of a solution like that, and actually see how that you would roadmap from there out into your broader organization and into the future. I think it's an excellent initiative from Microsoft. I'd encourage you all to investigate it. As we said, there's a funding stream there, so you can basically investigate these initially, the technologies, through a proof of value at no risk, and then get the value out of that and understand what this means for your organization. I'm conscious I'm just at the end of my time, so what I will do is I'm going to hand back to Darren and into the final wrap up and Q&A session.
Thanks, William. That was great. Great to see a case study. I think a case study always brings everything together, brings all the theory together and shows it in practice. So thanks very much for that. That's really useful. Okay, so I guess we're just over the hour mark now. So we are going to do a Q&A session. However, before we do that, I'm conscious some people may not be able to stay. A couple of people have dropped off. So just some concluding takeaways and remarks, and then we'll go to the Q&A. First things first, I want to thank all the speakers here for the excellent and really informative presentations we've heard today. Thanks to you also, the audience, for your time and your interest in our webinar. It's been great to have you here. Look, we've heard a lot today about the complexity of the regulations, the compliance burden, the environment that's there. We've talked about risks in terms of fines, breaches, operational risks, and barriers to progress. There's a lot of things there to be concerned about, but equally we want people to understand that, as I said there at the start, where there is risk, there is also opportunity, and those challenges represent opportunities for you and your businesses and your organizations. Opportunities for those who are prepared. What does being prepared look like? Well, you've got a good taste for that today. You've seen some of the tools available. The expertise is there to help you, as William just said. Think about the proof of value. Excellent initiative from Microsoft. Think about that for your own organization. Think about use cases. Reach out to us for a conversation. It can do no harm to talk and explore the possibilities. Talk to us about how you might leverage the benefits of Microsoft Fabric, Microsoft Purview, manage those risks, which is an important takeaway. Take advantage of those opportunities, equally important. Get your organization data ready. So thanks everybody. Thank you very much. What I'm going to do now is just invite all of the speakers back to the podium, the virtual podium as it is. So if you'll turn your cameras back on, guys, we do have some questions here. And we'll run through some of those questions. So I'm going to start by going back to the first presentation. Ian, a couple of questions came in there for yourself. So the first one there was what is the current status of the Irish government transposing NIS2 into law?
Yeah. So on. Sorry, Darren, do you want me to jump in on that?
Yeah.
So on that, so the general scheme of the cybersecurity bill was published, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks ago in early September. Now we've looked at that for a number of clients, and I guess perhaps to frame it reasonably candidly, it requires further work, right? It's not a sort of finalized version of the draft bill. So we haven't seen that yet, but ultimately it's required pretty soon, right? Like I touched on in my part of the presentation, NIS2 comes into effect and will apply from the 17th of October. So we literally have 3 or 4 weeks to sort that out. Whether the government will do that, they've committed repeatedly to making sure the legislation is in force in time. They're up against it now, to put it mildly. So we'll see how that goes. But we do at least have, like I said, that general scheme, which gives you a sense of what the legislation is going to look like, albeit that it's a little bit rough and ready at this stage and needs a bit more refinement to become an actual piece of legislation that can be enacted.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Ian. I have another one for you, Ian, as well. So this is from Gary. Sure. Slightly longer question. So who does the Data Act apply to? Would it apply to the likes of Microsoft or ServiceNow to provide switching services to other SaaS providers?
Yeah.
Is it limited to services hosted in a specific jurisdiction? So probably two questions there.
Yeah, so I think the short answer on the ServiceNow and Microsoft piece is yes. Will certainly apply to aspects of what they do as SaaS service providers. In terms of who else it applies to, we also touched on providers of connected products and related services, which, to be honest, may be less relevant to the audience here. So your sort of app that controls your fridge, for example, would be a good example, or whatever, your car and all that sort of stuff. So those types of services would be in scope. In terms of its jurisdictional scope, I'll need to double check that, but I think typically these pieces of legislation are focused on those products that are made available on the European market, right? So regardless of whether you're located in the US or Asia or whatever, if you're making these products and services available in Europe, that's how the legislation tends to kick in.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks for that. Okay, I've got a few questions here, so I'm just looking over them. This one's probably for yourself, Paul. Relates to Microsoft Purview being a pivotal tool for data governance, which obviously you covered. Could you elaborate on its role in enhancing data transparency and accountability in enterprise organizations?
Sure, yeah, no problem. So I think the benefits of having a governance platform like Purview in place are, once you understand what exactly you have, what it's being used for, and who has access to it, there's an also additional kind of reporting functionality built into it, or potentially with the benefit of Fabric, that allows you to start to generate insights on why is the data being used, for what purpose, where it resides, and that can lead into you being able to produce better transparency reports, or just be able to comply with different kind of external bodies that you might need to be able to show that you're aligning to different acts or different kind of bits of compliance. So I think what it does is it really kind of eases your ability to confidently say to individuals, I believe I'm compliant and here's the reasons why, and there's the report that shows all the data points.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense, Paul. Thanks for that. That's great. I'm just going through my list of questions here. So one for, I think this is probably for yourself, William. How can Fabric assist me in managing my organization's AI strategy?
Yeah, so I think hopefully one of the themes that's come out throughout the webinar here from the beginning, where we've been talking about the obligations, which we all understand, but then moving towards the opportunity. One of the key things about AI models is the quality of how they're being trained and the information that's going into them. Now, we've a number of case studies in this area, and I hope actually to be talking about this with my colleagues and partners at a future webinar where we'll talk through where the use of AI technology can really be game changing in terms of driving costs down and increasing competitiveness and increasing automation and so on. And by having the unified data platform in place, it gives you that absolute traceability of what's actually going into those models, and where the models are then being used, where the information coming out of the models is being used. And you then, as well as you get the capability to be fully compliant with the regulatory issues. But furthermore, you get to ensure that the value you're getting from the AI models is optimized, because it's as good as the quality information going in there. So for example, organizations, it's common that organizations will have file shares or SharePoints folders that might have, let's say, unclassified information in there. So it could be documents that are in draft status or information that should have been purged that was never approved and so on. Now, if you don't put in a properly governed platform and you start feeding information like that into your AI models, you're going to have potentially poor quality data in those scenarios. So having a Fabric stroke Purview architecture is a real game changer for enabling the actual game changing technology of AI to move forward. So yeah, it really is fundamental, and I hope we'll be talking about this again at a future webinar.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, so it really is a case of poor quality in, poor quality out. And William, I have one more for you here as well. A couple more questions to get through. I'm just conscious of time, but we'll take 3 or 4 minutes. And this is about data integration. So how do you recommend organizations approach the deployment of Microsoft Fabric to provide better departmental insights at the departmental level while also ensuring regulatory compliance?
Yeah, so I hope we've kind of touched off a lot of those elements today. So, like, first of all, deploying, I would make the point again about deploying Fabric, that we do it in that agile fashion. So one of the things about the case study that we gave there, we talked about the medallion architecture, right? Now, essentially, it's the bronze, silver, gold, where we can bring data in its existing structure, bring that into Fabric, have it at least we have it sitting there in one lake in a cost-effective storage, and we can then start to do cleansing and to do proper classification of the information as we move it forward. As we move it forward to our gold area or our gold lake house, we're then at every point in the chain, we know then that who can see what, because we've applied the governance rules, because we know whether it's a standalone Fabric analytics situation or whether we've applied Purview and we've got our business domains and data catalogs clearly called out there, that it gives you that federated analytical capability and the federated accountability that goes along with that, so that you can then move from your organizational structure. You can map your organizational structure and your information that's going with that all the way to the top and all the way back down again. So it really is very specifically designed to solve problems like the one you've just called out there.
Okay, thanks, William. 2 more questions, but one I'm just going to put to Ian. Ian, somebody's asked a question here about the Data Act, which I know is about movement of data. Does GDPR impact on what data can be shared under the Data Act?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question, right? And the answer is yes, but it's a complex one. And actually, interestingly, for the person who asked that question, the European Commission released an FAQ on the Data Act, I think only earlier this week, and it talks about the interaction between the Data Act and the GDPR. So that's definitely worth a look. But fundamentally, there is a natural tension there, right? So the Data Act is about accessing data, sharing data, porting data, et cetera, and the GDPR is based on principles around data minimization, purpose limitation, et cetera. So how do you square the circle? The answer is it won't be easy, but a lot of it will fundamentally go to that piece around transparency, right? So being clear with people around how and why you use your data, because if you think about the Data Act, effectively it can involve, one SaaS provider providing a suite of data to another SaaS provider to facilitate switching of services. And obviously disclosures of data between different organizations are permitted under the GDPR. It's just there'll need to be, perhaps this is one of multiple things you'll need to think about, but that enhanced level of transparency around how you may use that data, how you may share it with other organizations to comply with obligations under the Data Act, for example. So the answer is yes, absolutely impacts it. Multiple things you'll have to think about, transparency being one of the ones that should be at the forefront of your mind.
Thanks very much, Ian. Okay. I have one final question. I just want to go back to the point about proof of value. So I have been asked the question here. I guess William, maybe Paul may want to comment here too. What sort of investment in terms of cost and time should people expect if they're to engage in a proof of value for their own organization? William, do you want to jump in first, maybe?
Sure, yeah. Well, first and foremost, for the implementation of the first of the proof of value, ideally zero, because we'll be utilizing a Microsoft funding stream for that. So what we'll be looking to do is to work with the organization, identify the high value use case that at the end of the process, we'll be able to see that, yes, we did this particular finance use case that was causing us real issues. Let's say it's something to do with cost forecasting for large projects or something, which might be a very manual, kludgy process of copying Excel files from this system to that system and so on. So we'd settle on something like that, and then we would implement a portion of that using the proof of value funds that Microsoft would make available, and then write a report and a roadmap and all these different things as part of that and deploy that. The costs around what you would then use in terms of consumption, that really depends on your own organization. For example, if you've got some of the platforms in place already, chances are it'll be negligible. But really, it depends on the scale of what you were trying to do and where you want to move from there. But like, if you can get to like potentially at the end of a proof of value and not have had any outgoings at all, which is quite common.
Okay, great. That's fine. Thanks very much. And obviously, Paul, I referenced yourself there because I know Microsoft very helpfully have brought this initiative out. So I don't know if you want to add, but
no, I guess I just describe what it is in a little bit more detail. It's a way for us to provide our partners in the market some funding to work with customers to basically realize the value of technology in your organization. So it's partner-led. The Microsoft teams can support you and the partner in being successful with this, but please speak to the partners and OpenSky and have the conversation, and then they can make the request for the funding if it makes sense. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Okay, so we talked about managing risks. I also talked about moving to take advantage of opportunities. There's one there, proof of value. So what I would say is thanks again to the speakers, everyone, great presentations. Thanks to everyone for joining us. Reach out to us, take advantage of the proof of value, get your organization data ready. We hope you enjoyed the session today. So thanks everyone, goodbye. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.